1. Cinematic low-angle shot of a heavy steel bunker door descending within 4 inches of a wet concrete floor. 2. Close-up of a trembling hand sliding underneath a heavy metal door, fingers searching for a grip against the smooth concrete. 3. The dramatic silhouette of hydraulic bolts slamming into place, casting long shadows across a dark bunker entrance. 4. A high-contrast shot of the bunker interior as the locking pins drive in, causing dust to shake from the ceiling. 5. A wide shot of a sterile decontamination room bathed in the rotating glow of red emergency lights. 6. Close-up on wet floor drains in a bunker, reflections of red light shimmering in the dark pools. 7. A rack of empty white paper suits hanging on a metallic wall, swaying slightly in the industrial ventilation. 8. Focus on a small square of reinforced glass in a steel door, obscured by a dark, rust-colored smear. 9. A cinematic portrait of a man in coveralls, his face illuminated by the red emergency beacon, looking at a locked door. 10. Close-up of a security badge reading, "Facilities Systems" being held by a trembling hand. 11. A wide shot of the dark, industrial ventilation shafts and hydraulic galleries under a municipal water plant. 12. The interior of an old Cold War bunker, featuring heavy concrete walls and weathered industrial pipes. 13. A glowing wall panel displaying a bright red, "Access Denied" message in a dark hallway. 14. A close-up of a man's face, Deputy Director Eric Halprin, showing intense internal conflict and hidden fear. 15. An inner decontamination arch with flickering fluorescent lights and a silent alarm beacon. 16. The visual representation of a sweet, cloying atmosphere, with thick haze and dripping bleach foam in a bunker. 17. A cinematic shot of a police sergeant leaning against a tiled wall, his forehead resting on his knees in distress. 18. Focus on a metal floor grate where dark, thin filaments cling to the drainage edges like wet hair. 19. A portrait of June Holloway in a volunteer EMS vest, her eyes narrowed with sharp focus and concentration. 20. A low-light shot of a biology teacher kneeling on a wet floor, her hair pulled back with a simple pencil. 21. A cinematic close-up of a penlight illuminating a dark corner of a decontamination room. 22. A view through a small glass pane showing distorted, dark shapes striking against the door from the outside. 23. An expansive shot of level 2 of the bunker, filled with industrial manifolds and heavy machinery. 24. A weathered control relay on an air scrubber manifold, showing signs of age and neglect. 25. Cinematic lighting on a buried concrete structure beneath a water plant, looking like a forgotten tomb. 26. A vintage radio upstairs crackling with static in a dimly lit office room. 27. A wide shot of people collapsing in a line outside a clinic, represented by blurred movement and long shadows. 28. A scene of confusion and sudden tension at a main gate, with a truck crashed into a chain-link fence. 29. A group of diverse survivors, nurses, plant operators, and a bus driver huddled in an access building. 30. The dramatic moment the scanner at the bunker entrance flags a person with a bright red warning light. 31. A close-up of a finger pressing a mute button on a security console to silence an alarm. 32. A high-angle shot of the heavy bunker doors finally locking shut with a mechanical finality. 33. A cinematic digital clock display showing the time 3:40 in a dark, silent room. 34. The impact of something heavy hitting the outside of the steel door, vibrating the metal surface. 35. A row of survivors sitting against a concrete wall, their faces etched with shock and exhaustion. 36. Close-up on a man's lips turning white at the edges, a sign of shock and deteriorating health. 37. A tall man, Dev Singh, standing in a protective posture, his silhouette framed by the bunker's industrial lights. 38. An intense close-up of Singh's eyes, showing decades of experience and current resolve. 39. A wide shot of the rotating red emergency light washing over the bunker's metallic surfaces. 40. A cinematic shot of a jaw flexing in tension as a man refuses to answer a difficult question. 41. An elderly man, Warren Pike, with liver-spotted hands gripping a heavy metal wrench. 42. A high-contrast shot of the group staring at their leader in a room that feels increasingly dangerous. 43. A woman, Ellen Halprin, sitting on a metal bench wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. 44. The visual of a fever moving through a person, represented by sweat and trembling hands in the red light. 45. A close-up of eyes webbed with burst red vessels, looking up with a haunting expression. 46. A cinematic shot of a gauze-wrapped forearm with 3 dark, petal-shaped stains soaking through. 47. The interior of a medical cubicle with glass walls, reflecting the anxious faces of those outside. 48. A chaotic scene in a bunker represented by blurred figures and shifting shadows as tension boils over. 49. A heavy fire axe being pulled from an emergency glass case, the glass shattering in slow motion. 50. A close-up of a heavy wrench being taken off an emergency tool board. 51. A wide shot of a woman being dragged into a glass-walled medical cubicle. 52. The dramatic slamming of a glass door, sealing a sick person away from the rest of the group. 53. A man pounding his fists against a glass partition, his face a mask of grief and desperation. 54. A cinematic shot of a woman scrubbing her shoes with white decontamination foam until her hands are raw. 55. A collection of survival supplies, nitrile gloves, face shields, and bleach concentrate on a steel table. 56. A row of cots and 4 fluids set up in a makeshift infirmary under flickering lights. 57. A locked cabinet of sedatives, the keyhole glinting in the dim light of the bunker. 58. The rhythmic throb of a massive generator in a dark, subterranean room. 59. A map of the bunker layout showing right angles, cinderblock dorms, and narrow corridors. 60. A thick blast door with a heavy locking mechanism, tied to a central security system. 61. A low-angle shot of the hydraulic control room in Level 2, filled with levers and gauges. 62. A cinematic view of a medical cubicle window fogging up from the breath of someone inside. 63. A close-up of a woman's hand against a glass pane, reaching toward someone she can no longer touch. 64. The visual transition of a person's eyes losing recognition, the pupils dilating to swallow the iris. 65. A person striking a glass partition with their shoulder, represented by a sudden, jarring movement. 66. A wide shot of survivors being moved into a dormitory and the heavy door being sealed shut. 67. A supply shelf being rolled across a corridor to create a makeshift barricade. 68. A close-up of a hand being wrapped tightly in a white bandage until the knuckles turn gray. 69. A group of 3 people taking flashlights and a pry bar as they prepare to move deeper into the bunker. 70. The main lights of the bunker dipping and flickering as if the building itself were breathing. 71. A haunting shot of a kitchen with a stockpot of coffee and 6 neat paper cups on a counter. 72. A POV shot looking down a steel grate staircase into the dark depths of Level 2. 73. A flashlight beam sliding over industrial pipes and a maintenance cart tipped against a wall. 74. A man sitting in the corner of a lower landing, his head striking the cinder blocks softly in a rhythmic motion. 75. The eerie silhouette of a plant operator in oily coveralls, his face turned away from the light. 76. A close-up of an ear stripped and damaged, with dark ribbons of dried fluid on a collar. 77. A flashlight being dimmed to a narrow slit to avoid attracting attention in the dark. 78. The sound of movement in the distance, represented by a pipe rattling in a dark corridor. 79. A close-up of a trembling hand showing a deep cut from a metal toolbox. 80. A high-angle shot of a dark stairwell as a sudden shriek echoes from the levels above. 81. A frantic struggle to close a blast door as a heavy slab presses into a barricade. 82. The reflection of a man on the floor against a row of lockers, his hand clamped to a neck wound. 83. A cinematic shot of a man's eyes wide with shock as he realizes the consequence of his actions. 84. A group of people standing in a control room, their faces lit by the glow of green terminal text. 85. A monitor showing a live feed of a decontamination chamber with red spinning lights. 86. A dark shape looking directly into a security camera, its face obscured by shadows and stains. 87. A computer screen displaying a series of logs and "access denied" warnings. 88. A cinematic shot of the main blast door, status light glowing a stubborn, unyielding red. 89. The realization of a lid, instead of a shelter, shown through a cold, industrial computer interface. 90. A high-contrast shot of the words, "Maintain seal," on a glowing monitor screen. 91. A map overlay showing an old sludge bypass tunnel hidden beneath the bunker's floors. 92. The visual of a collapsed plug in a drainage gallery, represented by cracked concrete and silt. 93. A group splitting tasks in the dark, preparing gear and checking masks for a final escape. 94. A close-up of a bite mark on a hand, with tissue turning dark and bruised at the edges. 95. A person wiping their nose and seeing a dark stain on their hand, realizing their time is short. 96. A cinematic shot of the maintenance run, a narrow corridor with sweating concrete walls. 97. A flashlight beam reflecting off a stainless steel housing, illuminating a dark corner. 98. A woman in a hospital gown pressing her hand against a large air intake grill. 99. The rhythmic striking of a forehead against a metal grill in time with a pulsing generator. 100. A dark figure moving with sudden speed through a pipe chase, bare feet slapping on concrete. 101. The interior of the hydraulic room with pressure accumulators and manual release levers. 102. A close-up of a maintenance terminal showing carrier trace detected in return air. 103. The bunker trembling under a heavy impact from the surface, causing dust to fall from the seams. 104. A man looking up at the ceiling as the sound of a distant explosion muffled by concrete rolls through. 105. A manual lever being pulled with great effort, the metal groaning under the strain. 106. A radio handset crackling with static and the sound of someone breathing heavily on the other line. 107. The terrifying realization of a familiar voice calling from behind a locked door. 108. A flashlight beam revealing a crowded corridor filled with shifting, restless shadows. 109. A woman throwing a bleach jug that bursts against the floor tiles, creating a white chemical cloud. 110. A cinematic shot of a man firing a sidearm in a narrow concrete corridor, the muzzle flash lighting the walls. 111. The heavy mechanical slamming of a corridor door, sealing off a dangerous section. 112. A group of survivors huddled in a dark room, their faces lit only by a single green glow stick. 113. A high-angle shot of people moving through the bunker in a staggered, silent line. 114. The PA system coming alive with a pre-recorded message from a leader who is no longer alive. 115. A view of the sump level with a hatch standing open like a dark wound in the concrete. 116. The cold, damp atmosphere of a sludge bypass tunnel, with iron ladder rungs and black water. 117. A group of people wading through knee-deep black sludge in a narrow concrete pipe. 118. The silhouette of a man staying behind at a hatch, holding a wrench and a pistol in the dark. 119. The final slamming of a hatch wheel, the metal clanging with a sound of permanent separation. 120. A POV shot moving through a round, dark tunnel with rebar poking through the cracked ceiling. 121. The visual of a rusted iron storm flap being pried open with a heavy metal bar. 122. The first rush of freezing night air and river mist entering a dark drainage tunnel. 123. A wide shot of a group crawling out of a drainage pipe onto a muddy riverbank. 124. The black silhouette of the water plant's retaining wall against a dark, pre-dawn sky. 125. A distant view of a town with no lights except for a few flickering emergency strobes. 126. The sight of two distant fires burning on the horizon, casting an orange glow on the clouds. 127. A powerful military spotlight sweeping across a dark hillside and a concrete wall. 128. A group of survivors hiding in thick drainage brush, watching a perimeter from afar. 129. A A cinematic shot of helicopters flying low over a town at dawn, their silhouettes dark against the gray sky. 1:30. A convoy of white decontamination trucks moving slowly along a highway at sunrise. 1:31. A portrait of a woman looking back at the ridge, her expression one of profound loss and survival. 1:32. A close-up of a survival tin containing a simple flash drive and a few personal mementos. 1:33. A lone figure sitting in a dimly lit motel room, staring at a laptop screen. 1:34. The visual of an unmarked padded envelope sitting on a weathered wooden table. 1:35. A computer screen showing a list of bunkers and their status, containment lost, or no survivors. 1:36. A cinematic close-up of a hand reaching out to touch a cold, reinforced window pane. 1:37. The image of a long, dark corridor fading into shadows, representing the memory of the bunker. 1:38. A symbolic shot of a steel door bolt sliding home, representational of being forgotten. 1:39. A high-contrast shot of a single drop of water falling into a dark pool in a concrete room. 1:40. The reflection of a red emergency light in a pair of tired, weary eyes. 1:41. A wide shot of the river gorge at dawn, the water flowing cold and indifferent to the events above. 1:42. A cinematic representation of a buried lie, the bunker hidden beneath the quiet water plant. 1:43. The texture of rusted iron chains snapping under the pressure of a pry bar. 1:44. A close-up of a security badge discarded in the mud, its surface scratched and dirty. 1:45. A person walking away from the camera down a lonely road, disappearing into the morning mist. 1:46. A symbolic shot of a handprint on a glass pane, slowly fading away. 1:47. The interior of a silent, empty control room with dead monitors and dust motes in the air. 1:48. A close-up of a heavy manual wheel lock, frozen in place by rust and time. 1:49. A cinematic shot of the bunker's exhaust vents releasing a final puff of steam into the night air. 1:50. The sound of silence in a buried structure, represented by a still, dark hallway. 1:51. A lone flashlight beam dying out on a concrete floor as the batteries fail. 1:52. The visual of a person's breath misting in the cold air of a drainage tunnel. 1:53. A wide shot of the military perimeter at night, with glowing floodlights and dark vehicle shapes. 1:54. A cinematic portrait of a survivor, their face half-lit by the cold light of a computer monitor. 1:55. The texture of a damp wool blanket wrapped around trembling shoulders. 1:56. A close-up of a pencil used to pull back hair, a small detail of normalcy in a crisis. 1:57. The rhythmic dripping of water from a pipe, echoing in an empty, subterranean chamber. 1:58. A high-angle shot of a group of people moved into a dark dorm, their silhouettes huddled together. 1:59. A cinematic shot of a man's hand clamped over a wound, blood seeping through his fingers. 1:60. The visual of a lid being placed over a situation, symbolized by a heavy stone slab. 1:61. A close-up of a computer log showing the exact second a life-changing decision was made. 1:62. The eerie glow of a single green glow stick in a vast, dark industrial space. 1:63. A wide shot of a person standing at the edge of a gorge, looking out over a silent valley. 1:64. The sound of a radio crackling with static, the only connection to a world that has moved on. 1:65. A cinematic shot of a man's face as he makes a final, selfless choice in the shadows. 1:66. The visual of a heavy chain being wrapped around a door handle in a frantic hurry. 1:67. A close-up of a woman's eyes as she realizes the truth about the shelter. 1:68. A wide shot of a dark, industrial hallway with red light reflecting off every surface. 1:69. The texture of a wet, rust-colored smear on a piece of reinforced glass. 1:70. A cinematic shot of a person walking through a field of tall grass toward the horizon. 1:71. The reflection of a distant fire in a puddle of water on the ground. 1:72. A close-up of a hand holding a key that no longer fits any lock. 1:73. The visual of a buried truth, represented by a file hidden in a dark corner of a server. 174. A cinematic shot of a sunrise over a quiet, empty town. 175. The texture of a heavy wool coat sleeve being grabbed by a desperate hand. 176. A close-up of a face illuminated by the harsh, flickering light of a flare. 177. A wide shot of a concrete bunker entrance, now silent and overgrown with weeds. 178. The visual of a ghost town, represented by abandoned cars and silent streets. 179. A cinematic shot of a person's shadow lengthening against a concrete wall as they walk away. 180. The reflection of a spinning red light in a pool of dark liquid on a floor grate. 181. A close-up of a hand pressing a record button on a vintage audio device. 182. A wide shot of a group of survivors walking together through a misty forest at dawn. 183. The texture of a cold, metallic door handle under a trembling hand. 184. A cinematic shot of a person looking at an old photograph by the light of a single candle. 185. The visual of a forgotten hero, represented by a wrench left on a dark stairwell landing. 186. A close-up of a computer screen showing the words, Federal Response Pending. 187. A wide shot of a dark river flowing under a bridge, the water reflecting the stars. 188. The texture of a rough concrete wall, scratched with a desperate message. 189. A cinematic shot of a person's face as they listen to an old audio recording. 190. The reflection of a red emergency light on a pair of cracked glasses on the floor. 191. A close-up of a hand reaching out to touch a cold, damp wall in the dark. 192. A wide shot of a quiet morning in the gorge, the mist rising from the water. 193. The visual of a sealed fate, represented by a heavy steel bolt in a locked position. 194. A cinematic shot of a person standing in the rain, looking up at a dark, empty building. 195. The reflection of a flickering monitor in a dark, empty room. 196. A close-up of a hand holding a small, silver compass in the palm. 197. A wide shot of a lonely highway at night, the only light coming from the moon. 198. The texture of a piece of white gauze, stained with 3 dark petals of blood. 199. A cinematic shot of a person's face as they realize they are the last one left. 200. The visual of a buried memory, represented by a tattered EMS vest in the mud. 201. A close-up of a finger tracing the lines on an old industrial map. 202. A wide shot of the bunker's entrance, now a permanent part of the landscape. 203. The reflection of a single star in a dark pool of water inside a tunnel. 204. A cinematic shot of a person standing at a window watching the sun rise. 205. The visual of survival at any cost, represented by a heavy fire axe held tight. 206. A close-up of a hand closing a survival tin for the last time. 207. A wide shot of a silent valley, with the water plant standing like a sentinel on the ridge. 208. A cinematic final shot of a person walking into the light of a new day, leaving the shadows behind.